Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And a warm welcome to Newsline Zoom. Zoom because of the growing numbers of the pandemic CV-19, and Newsfirst is no different from everybody else. We are all trying our very best to stop the spread of this dreaded disease that has engulfed not only us in Sri Lanka but all over the world. And of course our thoughts, our prayers are with all those who have been afflicted with this disease, and our admiration to the people in the front line, the health service workers and of course the forces who are all doing their bit, as well as the Republic of Sri Lanka too. Now then, our guest this evening is Mr. Dhananath Fernando from Advocata, The Economist. Very good evening to you, Mr. Fernando.
Good evening, Faraz.
Thank you for being on Newsline Zoom. I'd like to ask you a very straightforward question, actually. How do we choose? Do we choose the lockdown or do we choose the economy? Or indeed, is there a middle path?
It's a very difficult question for us, for the government, because there'll be, I think we have to strike a balance, because economy is also important, so as our healthcare system, because if the, as we all know, if the numbers are growing, which is beyond our, beyond that certain level, that would be a problem. So I think for the moment, we have to listen to the healthcare advisors, but the important thing as a solution is we have to get ourselves prepared for the next round. I think for that, maybe the booster vaccine and keeping things prepared in advance would be the way forward, because with this, the current status of the economy, we can't afford to have long lockdowns, because I think this problem has been discussed many a times. It's our economy is not at all in good shape, and in terms of our employment, it's about more than 60% is informal. So while those who take the monthly salaries home, especially the government sector and some of the private sector, may be okay, but the daily wage earners will be having a very hard time and difficult time, so as the government of Sri Lanka.
So I see that the government is either proposing or already giving 2,000 rupees for the people affected during this lockdown. Is that a figure that can be sustained?
In my view, it would be difficult with 2,000, because the numbers show Advocata has a tracking called Batkari indicator. So according to our tracking, for a member of for a 4-member household, for a week, it cost about 1,200 to 1,300 rupees. So if you are considering a month, it's not enough. And this is only on food, only like the ingredients, without considering the gas and all that. So it would be difficult, but I understand the government is also in a very difficult situation. They really don't have money, neither foreign exchange. So I don't think it's enough. But however, I would like to bring to the solution. Now, if you look at one reason why the government really do not have money, and especially to manage this sort of a safety net, is because our targeting has not been right for us, and we do not have the infrastructure to do the targeting. Now, if you look at a country like India, they have this Aadhaar system, they have a cash payment system tier-wise. If you are on the poorest of the poor, you will get a subsidy as a cash transfer for your food, for your health, for your education.
That's a direct transfer?
Direct transfer. And that minimizes the interventions on the market. And if you are one tier above that poverty line, you may be able to afford your healthcare. So they will get a slightly lower figure or lower cash transfer, which could only afford your food and maybe transport or something like that. So, and also it's, to an extent, it's market oriented. Now, for an example, there are some periods where the fuel prices go up. Now we are experiencing that because of the global fuel prices are increasing. So when you have a digital system, based on that global commodity prices change, you can actually adjust your cash transfers. But since we don't have a cash transfer, what the governments are trying to do, you try to bring the prices all across down. So with that, someone with a 500,000 household income and someone with a 50,000 household income, they both get the commodities at the same price. So basically, we are subsidizing someone's fuel bill who has a 500,000 fuel 500,000 income, who could easily afford that price variation. So the government is wasting money which could have basically given to someone who can't afford. So as a solution, I think we have to move forward, because if there are more mutations coming in with the COVID, if we have to experience lockdowns or like restricted commuting between like cities or districts or whatever, I think we have to get ourselves prepared for a better targeting system of these safety nets, rather than discussing whether 5,000 or 2,000. And of course, we know the inflation has also picked up, with the food inflation above 11%. So you can really adjust it if you have a proper system.
So the use of bank accounts to directly transfer money into those sounds like a pretty good idea, in the sense that there is no involvement of politicians in the actual distribution of the money. In Sri Lanka, that can mean a lot of things.
Exactly, and that's why I think this process is not getting implemented. There have been multiple discussions on some digital transfer system, but that is the problem. But we have to avoid that, and I think this is a good. I mean, contextually and consequences wise, this is the right time, because we are in a very difficult situation. So when things are getting difficult, you have to make hard choices. So I hope for the government this would become a hard choice, though they are not very willing to consider that option. But I think we are at a sort of a dead end. We have to consider this choice.
But shame on the government, surely, for not taking the bull by the horns, and especially during a pandemic like we are suffering now, where we are asking people to keep their distance, to be washing their hands and so on, and wearing a mask, to go and manually collect the stipend of say 5,000 or even 2,000, to me is absolutely ridiculous, and it's a shame on those people who are charged with responsibility and who are not carrying out that charge. I mean, don't you agree that this is, if ever there was a moment, this is the moment to get everybody to open bank accounts?
Exactly, Faraz. This is a moment that we should seriously consider economic reforms. I mean, we can't move forward from here if we are not serious about reforms. And that is then this safety net reform is something paramount important, because in any economic reform, it would be very difficult. There will be losers, and we should make sure that the poorest of the poor having some sort of a safety net. And this is quite important. And I'm sure if we target it right, because if you look at the Samurdhi numbers, more than 50% of our households are getting Samurdhi. And I'm sure it's wrongly targeted. And also I'm sure there are more people outside the Samurdhi program who are actually supposed to get the Samurdhi, or who are more deserved to get the Samurdhi. So without the right targeting, it would be just a waste of our resources.
Now, if we look at our growing problem with the foreign exchange crisis, Mr. Fernando, what are the principal sources or the income streams in terms of foreign exchange into the country?
Basically, for us, it has been exports, foreign direct investments, and our remittances. And sometimes we get loans and things like that, cash transfers and all, swaps and all that is what we have been doing. But now, as we all know, we are in a bit of a tight situation, which has been again discussed extensively. Our credit rating has been downgraded, so we can't really get the loans. And foreign direct investments, it's also not a very conducive environment, because our COVID numbers are rising and our competitor markets are doing well. And in terms of ease of doing business, we are in the 99th position. So as an investor, there are 99 more options to consider as an investor also within the region and out of the region. And export is one silver line, but of course exports is not doing as we expect. Export numbers have picked up, but it cannot compensate what we have been losing out on the other end. And remittances have been doing to an extent good, but again it's somewhat stagnant, and with the current exchange rate problem, people are not really in cashing the dollars. They are using undial and different informal methods. So that's the situation in my view.
Mr. Fernando, the question of remittances, we are getting what we are, which is remarkable because of the largely sort of unskilled nature of our migrant labor force. And the way around that, of course, is to increase those numbers. The numbers in the amount of remittance coming into Sri Lanka would be a wholesale investment in further education, in training. Does this government, I mean, since 1948 we've been masters of our destiny, but successive governments appear not to have done it. We've only got university entrance, maybe 30,000 and another 15,000 from the private sector. So around 45,000 graduates a year. Is that enough to get us out of this $4,000 per capita GDP trap?
It's definitely not enough for us. In terms of, as you said, we have been sending unskilled workers. So one main economic theory is when you send skilled workers, as well as when you have more intellectual people going, and again when they are coming back, there's a knowledge transfer. You call it the tacit knowledge. You can it's where you really bring a set of skills where you can become innovative and expand the market and expands the economy. So unfortunately, I mean, we have a big diaspora and we have been a country been in conflicts for a long time. I mean, if you look at the last 50 years, we always have been in conflicts. We had the war, and even before that, we have couple of political unrest. And even after the war, we had Digana incident. So if you really look at it, while we all love Sri Lanka, the last half a century hasn't been very peaceful. So as a result, most of the people left Sri Lanka and they got the citizenships in Australia, in Europe, in US. But actually, if we have a program that when they come back, but the main thing is you have to have a conducive environment for them to first come back. But if they come back, then this economy can be revived. But at the same time, I mean, our visa processors, if nothing has been conducive for them to come back. For an example, if someone gets married to a foreigner, that your spouse can't work here. So it really doesn't make economic sense that you just move here where your spouse can't work, because it really doesn't make, and that's not how the economies work. So I think those reforms needs to take place if we are considering this seriously. So one way to increase remittances is also doing that, making that conducive environment within the country, while we are making them upskilling them to do better jobs overseas.
And let's talk about this whole issue of upping our income in terms of foreign exchange in light of the significant amounts of monies that the Sri Lanka government has. In terms of debt, the foreign component of debt is about $30 billion, and in terms of rupees, the total debt stands at around 9,000 billion rupees, or put another way, 9 trillion rupees. After the break, in which we shall look at the headlines for primetime news, we'll be back on the other side.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.
And welcome back to Newsline Zoom. I'm in conversation with Mr. Dhananath Fernando from Advocata. Mr. Fernando, thank you for your comments so far, but in terms of increasing revenue, even from remittances and so on, within that whole context, which of the areas of our economic sector, there's 48, which of these sectors do you think have been greatly affected by the pandemic, and which sectors should the government be looking at so that we can address these issues on a sort of a rapid basis?
In my view, for us, all the sectors have been affected because about more than 60% is informal. And the economy is the ecosystem where, if you look at our establishments, about 99% of business establishments are micro, small, and medium enterprises. Only 0.2% is large enterprises. And even if you look at the large enterprises, they have a very long tail of supply chains connected to small and micro, medium enterprises. And in terms of GDP, micro, small, medium brings about 50%. And in terms of our employment, again, more than 50%, leaving the agricultural sector aside, is in informal, micro, and small, medium sector. So I think it's across affected. But the next question is, what's the solution? So in terms of a solution, as I always say, this is the right time. I mean, there cannot be a better time than this to do the reform. So in terms of the reform, I would like to prioritize, because now everyone is looking for solutions. The government has admitted this is an economic crisis. The opposition have admitted that this is a very tough situation. So everyone is in consensus that this is a tough situation. So in terms of reforms, I first go with mainly the deregulation of certain sectors and mainly unlocking our land component. Because you won't believe, only about 3% of the entire lands in Sri Lanka have a title. Most of them have deeds, and about 80% of the land is owned by the government. So main four factors of any production is the capital, land, labor. So without that land, and we have a wonderful island, without giving that land right to people, you can't expect the capital to flow in the first place. So that is very important to provide funds for DIMSAVIR, and getting that digital land registry is very, very important. Without that, there's no future. At the same time, that's a long-term one, but you have to first put your house in order in terms of our fiscal and monetary policy. Government is spending too much. Our state-owned enterprises are not performing well. There's a big uproar and discussion that the parliamentarians are donating their salaries to this COVID fund.
That's a bit of a joke, isn't it?
I mean, compared to the loss-making enterprises, the losses, I think the best service that they could do is at least privatize. I use that word, privatize this few of the key state-owned enterprises, because governed by, as you said, by 225 parliamentarians, they can donate about 33 million or 40 million maximum, even if they draw a salary about 200,000. But the losses of 5 state-owned enterprises out of 527 is about 128,000 million. It's 128 billion versus 33 to 40 million. So it's completely out of proportion. So I think those reforms has to take place for us. We have to start from somewhere. That would be my recommendation for the government. Whoever who comes in, this is the time. Do it.
Just do it. That's a great tagline from someone. I'm not going to mention who, but just do it. But so in that context of what you've been saying, do we need Sri Lankan Airlines?
My view, for us, we don't need, because I know there's a lot of sentiment, there's a lot of emotional attachment to Sri Lankan Airlines, and people believe it's a proud thing. It's you have the legacy and all that. For us, for a loss making, I mean, when your entire Samurdhi allocation is 54 billion, and when your airline making 62 billion losses, there is no proud associating with that. What is the proudest that you get carrying your flag in blue skies by compromising 60 billion rupees, while the poorest of the poor get 54 billion? I mean, it doesn't make sense. and there are more than enough airlines, I think, where you can do traveling. And now, before that, we have a bigger problem. We don't have dollars even to buy a air ticket to go abroad. So so that I don't see a reason. I mean, we have to make tough choices. If the country is prospering, and if we have enough dollar income, maybe you can afford to have a loss making airline. And I understand in other countries there are a lot of loss making airlines. But in our scale, for us, I don't think we can really afford, when people are dying out without oxygen, when we really don't have foreign exchange to bring our medicine down, and when we really don't have dollars to open LCs to do exports. When you run an airline with 60 billion losses, and out of that, a lot of is credit by BOC and most of the government banks, and you are also putting the entire banking system at risk. I don't see it is a reason to be proud, and I think that's something the government, any government, should seriously consider at this particular moment.
And but of course there'll be all hell to pay if the government was to shut down Sri Lankan Airlines. But what about things like you know, the Sri Lanka Ports Authority, which is a big employer in terms of numbers? Then we have the government railways, which has got a huge land sort of bank of underutilized land. The service is actually nothing short of appalling, with the crowds in the trains and the squalor of the trains. They're all sort of rusting and falling apart. Well, some of them are, most of them anyway. And I can't help but see on a working day how crowded public transport, especially on the railways, is. So what's the magic ticket? What should they be doing? I mean, do we need gyms, or do we need roads, or do we need to fix what we've already got? What is the, where's the choice? Yeah,
the priority definitely has to be on the basics, because our basics are not right. As you said, the public transportation have been a problem, and I think for us, if you allow the markets to work, this conversation wouldn't have come. And we all know railways is a monopoly, a government monopoly, badly managed, with a huge resource base, and with few people just underutilizing a large bank of land. And the service is unimaginably poor. So there are multiple sectors like that. Whenever the government is intervening, that is the outcome across the world. So I think, as I always say, this is the right time to put a priority list and do the necessary changes. This is a very serious situation, and we have to get this done. Public transport is one thing, and it's not only train for us. And I'm sure you may have heard. Now, even if you look at the private buses, your route permit is expensive than the bus. And again, I mean, people may say it's privatized, but there's a licensing system. It's a license lodge. Only you can get a license or like a route permit if you have some sort of a political connection. And they are not allowing more buses to come into the system. If you take 138 route, which is, I think, the most number of buses employed or fielded in that route, you can't find an air-conditioned bus. I'm sure people would be willing to pay, and willing to pay a higher price. Even if they find an AC bus, it's not about the pricing. It's just that the cartel is not allowing the supply side to get into the system. So with that, you can't expect a proper public transportation system. And these are not very expensive reforms as well. We are not asking government to field buses from the CTB. You have to just open up the market and let the market dynamics work. And these are not expensive. Politically, you have to sacrifice, of course, the private bus owners, they will strike and all that. But you have to negotiate and get it done. That's the skill of politics.
Well, that certainly is also the skill of people who know what they're doing, and is the downfall of people who don't know what they're doing. But Dhananath Fernando, thank you very much for being on Newsline Zoom. And on that note, we'll take your leave, and in the coming days we'll be discussing IMF or not. That's the question. Let's find out over the next few days on Newsline. Take care, have a great evening, and as always, God bless you.
Newsfirst Newsline with Faraz Shauketaly.